So disadvantages, actually I have told you, there will be more exports. So domestically the goods will be less, one thing. So you may not be able to meet the demand supply. So there will be a mismatch in demand supply, the domestic demand and domestic supply. Secondly, when you are exporting more forex is coming. When more forex is coming, equal amount of money is printed and circulated in the market. So more money will be circulated in the market. So money supply will increase. So automatically demand will increase. When money supply increase, demand will increase. Okay. So that will lead to inflation. So all these things are connected. So that will lead to inflation. So let me write it down. It is inflationary as it increase forex reserve. Just writing like this only, forex, this will increase money supply and that will increase the aggregate demand. So when the aggregate demand increases, inflation will increase. If the demand cannot meet with supply, if there is a mismatch in demand and supply, there will be inflation, the demand pull inflation. So that is the first disadvantage. Second one, so here we talked about demand pull inflation. It also lead to cost push inflation, because when you're imported commodities will become dearer. So those items, there will be a higher cost of production. So that lead to cost push inflation. Okay. So it lead to also cost push inflation as imported commodities become dearer. Okay, which will actually affect the economic growth. So when the cost of production is increasing, means it's definitely going to affect the growth. Okay, demand pull inflation is somewhat desirable, but it will actually increase the growth. But cost push inflation is not desirable, because it actually tend to reduce national income. So if you see here, what is demand pull inflation? So here you can see, this is the demand, this is the supply. So what is actually happening? So this was the previous situation. Now more demand, so demand curve is shifting rightward. So this is demand, this is supply, this is the new demand. So demand curve is shifting rightward. So now this is the case. So this was price 1, now price 2. So there is an increase in price, and this side it is national income. So national income increased. When the price is increased, national income is increased. This is what demand pull inflation. On the other side, if you take the cost push inflation, so I'm drawing it here again, national income, price here. Cost push inflation, let's take this normal scenario like this. This is the equilibrium position. Cost push means supply will be less. Okay, so supply will be less means supply curve shift leftward. Okay, leftward. So I'm shifting this up. This is the supply curve, this is the demand curve, this is the new supply. So you can see here the price is actually increased from P1 to P2, but you see here national income reduced. So that is the reason why I've told you this is demand pull inflation and this is cost push inflation. So both are inflationary, both are actually difficult, but somewhat demand pull inflation is desirable because it promotes growth, it promotes employment opportunity. So there are a lot of advantages is there when there is a demand pull inflation. It actually shows a good sign, there is a demand in the market. Why? Because money supply is there. Why? Because jobs are there. Why? Because employment is there, because growth is there. But see, this is actually a very dangerous thing. Okay, because national income is reducing, unemployment will be there, jobless people will be there, money won't be there. So all these are going to affect a lot of, create a lot of problems. Okay, so this is going to be a problem. Third one, it obviously increased the burden of external debt. We have already discussed. Increase burden of external debt in terms of domestic currency. Then it deteriorates terms of trade. It deteriorates term of trade. What do you mean by terms of trade? It refers to purchasing power of exports of a country in terms of quantity of imported commodities. So I've already discussed this, so there is no point in getting into the details of it. It also leads to drain of resources. Okay, so it also leads to drain of resources. So terms of trade, if you remember, we have actually discussed this. I have given you the equation also. What is that? Terms of trade, you can refer to the previous video. The price index number of exports, and we have marked it as px. X is export, okay, P is the price, and divided by price index number of imports, we marked it as PM. M was the import. So if you talk about the impact, when you talk about the short term impact, okay, so short term it may be desirable because you can promote export. Short term may be desirable to overcome a specific problem, but long term definitely not desirable, because this is not a permanent solution. China contributing 10% of world trade or world export, 10% of world exports, so that's actually a huge amount. Because China is following this policy. China is actually not following this to increase their exports. They are already having too much export, but to maintain that export, they are supposed to follow that. Okay, so to check that decline, China is doing this. Okay, so 2008 crisis, so to promote export and to maintain export, for these two, they are doing this. Okay, so their system is like fixed system, so like their system is actually related to revaluation and devaluation. It is not market mechanism. Okay, now have you heard of this beggar thy neighbor policy? This thing, beggar thy neighbor policy. See, this policy is all about one country is taking advantage of another country. So taking advantage of advantage at the cost of another country. So the other country will actually suffer. For example, China is exporting too much to US. What is actually happening? So the Chinese products are cheap and US products is not actually competitive with the Chinese products. So domestic production will be affected. So what will happen? US will come up with protectionist policy. So when they come up with protectionist policy, you cannot only impose that on China, you will impose that on every other country. So India is also actually affected. So India's export to US is very less because of these protectionist policies. So I can even say, or you can say that India's export to US is low because of China, because China is exporting and China is dumping the products. So they went for protectionist policy, and that prevented export from India also. So this is what you mean by beggar thy neighbor policy. Just let me write it down. A country taking advantage at the cost of other countries. See, when China is exporting to US this much, what is actually happening? The trade deficit of US is actually increasing, and more than that, domestic companies are forced to shut down, and that lead to a lot of problems. So protectionist measures. So if China won't go for devaluation, US might not have adopted this protectionist measures. So India's export would also have increased, maybe. Okay, so that's it. We will move to the next one, wider band exchange rate system. Okay, so third one, wider band exchange rate system. Okay, so let me write down the definition first and then I'll explain this. Under this, central bank fixes an exchange rate band. So there will be lower and upper limit for this band for the domestic currency within which its exchange rate is permitted to fluctuate. So it is not like anywhere you can fluctuate. There is an upper limit and lower limit, so between that it's like this only. So if you go for time in the x-axis and exchange rate here, so there will be an upper limit and there will be a lower limit. So the exchange rates will fluctuate like this. So in between they can go in any direction like this. Okay, so this is what you mean by wider band exchange rate system. Next is crawling peg exchange rate system. So fourth one, crawling peg exchange rate system. Okay, so under this, central bank fixes an exchange rate band for the domestic currency, which is periodically revised. Okay, see, it is similar to the previous one that we have discussed, wider band exchange rate system only. So there they are fixing a band which is having upper and lower limit. Here also they are fixing the band with upper and lower limit, but what actually happens is it will be revised periodically. So it is not like, you know, this is fixed here, you can see this is fixed, but here what is actually going to happen is, let's take this one. So here it is a time and here it is exchange rate. So it will be like this. So it will be like this for some time, then it will revise like this. Now it may fluctuate between that, or then after that it may revise like this, and then it may come back like this. Okay, so it will fluctuate like this. In between they will fluctuate like this, like this, like this. So central bank fixes the band which is having upper limit and lower limit, but that band will be periodically revised. That may increase, that may decrease. So it all depends on the central bank. So who's following this? China is actually following this. So they fix this upper and lower limit. Not only they are fixing, they periodically revise it. So that is why it is a kind of, you know, although you can see they are allowed to fluctuate between, you know, some distance, but since they can keep on revising that as per their wish, we can also consider this as a kind of fixed system, and that's why we are talking about devaluation and revaluation in case of China. So China is following this system. So it's actually a variant of fixed exchange rate system, even though you are allowed to fluctuate like this, but that fluctuation is actually fixed and it is periodically revised. So I would say it's a variant of, you know, fixed system, and China is following this system. So which system China is following? Crawling peg exchange rate system. Don't completely say fixed exchange rate system. Crawling peg exchange rate system. The bands are fixed, you're allowed to fluctuate, but they will keep on changing that band as per their, you know, policy decisions. And that's why we are talking about devaluation and revaluation. Next one is what we are following, India is following, managed float exchange rate system. So our policy is not about completely floating, just like China is not about completely fixed. It was crawling peg. So like that, India is not totally floating, it is managed float. Okay, so the fifth one, managed float exchange rate system. I'll write it down. Under this, exchange rate of the domestic currency is determined on the basis of its demand and supply, subject to the central bank's intervention in the forex market. See, what is the difference from floating system here? This much is same, determined on the basis of demand and supply. From here, it is subject to central bank's intervention. So RBI will interfere. That means it's not completely floating. RBI will interfere in case if there is a problem. Okay. So it is again based on demand supply. So who create demand, who create supply, all those things we have actually discussed. So it is similar to this only. So where we discussed that, we have discussed it somewhere here. Yeah, here. So say not here. Here, this one. So exactly the same thing. Demand will be there, supply will be there. So this is how it is going on. But now here, what will happen? RBI will interfere. Okay. So it's like this. This is quantity of dollar. So on the y-axis, price of dollar in terms of rupee. Okay. So price of dollar in terms of rupee. So demand curve will be there, supply curve will be there. So this is demand for dollar, this is supply of dollar, upward slope. So this is actually the equilibrium position. So here I'm not saying central bank can fix. If it is the case, that is fixed rate. So here central bank can interfere. That is why it is managed float. It is floating. So slightly the central bank can influence, but that influence is not much possible. Otherwise rupee would not have depreciated from 45 to 67. What the RBI can do maximum is, what I have told you is when the demand is increasing, the curve will shift rightward. So the price is actually increasing. Okay. So from 67 to 68 it is increased. Now what RBI can actually do is, when this is increasing, the demand is increasing, RBI, whatever forex is available with RBI can supply that forex. So the same percentage of supply increases there like this. What would have happened? So now you see what is the new point of equilibrium. This is a new point of equilibrium. So you can see price remains 67 itself. So 10% extra demand is there. Based on that 10% extra supply is given by RBI, then there won't be any depreciation of rupee. So that is one of the way in which you can actually solve the depreciation of rupee, but it is very limited role, and if that would have been done, we won't face this much problem, and we need to have huge forex for doing all these things. So there is always a limitation for central bank's intervention. Now we are following this system from when 1993 onwards till 1991 we were fixed. Okay, now 93 onwards we are following managed float. This is also called as dirty float. Why? Because not purely float, dirty float, because central bank can interfere. If you have huge forex with you, you can just pump that and you can manipulate the supply. So central bank can manipulate the supply. Okay, so that is why it is known as dirty float. So I hope this is clear for all of you. What all things we have discussed is done completely. If you have any doubt, you can get in touch with me. This is the Instagram ID. This is the Telegram channel. You can join the Telegram channel for all the videos. If you need any personal mentorship or sociology optional classes or anything, you can get in touch with me here in this Instagram. So see you guys.